Jeffrey. So good evening, everyone. My name is Latifa Phillips, and on behalf of Lowell Public Schools, I want to welcome all of you and thank you for being a part of today's session. Tonight is the first of a three-part series, and it's actually the last of the first of the three-part series, where we as a school district want to take intentional and active steps toward denouncing racism and discrimination of all forms within our school district and across our school community. This past year has been an unprecedented year where we've all been impacted in some way by the COVID-19 pandemic. And one impact of the pandemic that we want to address in particular tonight is the dramatic increase in racist incidents targeting members of the Asian American, and Pacific Islander community across our state, the entire country, and the globe. And when we see this kind of physical and verbalized violence emerging in our society, it's important for all of us, our communities, our institutions, to educate ourselves on the injustice that is occurring, reflect on what we're doing or can do to speak up for each other, and ultimately refuse to accept hate and racism of any kind in our school community. Tonight's session was developed in response to parent voices from the Khmer community, from our Cambodian community, where in a back to school orientation session, some families asked about whether their children would be safe coming back to school. And they weren't referring to COVID, but rather to physical and emotional safety as relates to racism as a byproduct of the COVID-19 pandemic. And that's a question no family or student should have to ask or fear as relates to school. And that prompted us to take these first steps to ensure that we are actively working to provide safe, inclusive, and respectful learning and working environments for all of our students, families, and staff. So tonight's session will be a learning session. We will center around our Asian American community in Lowell. We'll learn about the history of racism against Asian Americans in the United States, as well as examine the current context of racism. And then a second session will take place in early May, where we'll have the opportunity to listen and learn from people's lived experiences. And then in the final session, we'll provide families with strategies and tools for talking with their children about racism and ways that they can be part of anti-racist solutions. So again, we will focus on the Asian American community tonight, and in future sessions, we will continue to look closely at how racism and discrimination is impacting many of our communities here in Lowell, because we know that advancing racial justice for people of all races and ethnicities is critical to guaranteeing the safety and security of everyone. So with that said, I would like to introduce you to our facilitator this evening, Dr. Pitsumai Oy. She is a professor at the University of Massachusetts Center for Asian American Studies. And it has really been an honor to have her here with us for the two prior sessions and to finish tonight's session. So Dr. Oy.
Thank you so much, Latifa. I'm going to share my screen. And so please let me know if you can see it. Can everyone see this? And the slideshow. You will notice that I'm going to try to slow my pacing of my talking so that we could have strong interpretation. The objectives for today in our time together is for you as community members to learn a brief history of race in the United States. You will learn how to be an ally to your Asian and Asian American students, staff, and family. And you will also learn how to report incidents of racism and discrimination in Lowell Public Schools. Why are we here? Our community is under attack from multiple fronts. COVID-19 is attacking our bodies And for some of our community members, we have been attacked because of our racial identity. And because of these attacks, we're experiencing trauma. For our Asian American community, there has been over 3,800 incidents. 16% of those who have been attacked have been our young people, ages 12 and 20. And in a recent survey, 1 in 2 Chinese parents are afraid for their child's safety. And as Latifa has outlined, our Khmer people in our community and our parents are afraid for their children. As you notice, I'm getting emotional because I've just triggered myself. When we talk about race, racism, and racial trauma, different people have different reactions. And for me, as a community member, my body is reacting to 3 sessions about the racial trauma that my community has experienced. So please pay attention to your body. Think about how you process this information and take care of yourself. We will be viewing images and hearing stories of violence and discrimination. We're going to start our learning first with the idea of race. Race is not a biological or genetic category. We as humans all belong to the same species. We are Homo sapiens. Race is this man-made idea, what some people call a social construct, that is used as a tool for oppression and violence. It means it's been used to treat people differently and badly. Oppression comes in 4 different ways. There is oppression of ideas, which is considered ideological. Oppressions of policies and laws, which we call institutional oppression. Oppression that is experienced from people to people, that's interpersonal oppression. And then for the victims, they internalize all of these negative ideas into themselves, and that's called personal or internalized oppression. To understand race in the United States, you need to first acknowledge that Europeans have always had a fascination with the exotic Orient. And the Orient of that time was China. So back in 1275, when Marco Polo arrives in Shandu, China, he met with Kublai Khan. And when he returned to Italy, Marco Polo started telling stories of this exotic Orient, this land of the East, where there were spices, silk, rugs, and porcelain. And so when European colonizers went to seek the Cathay or the Indias, just like Christopher Columbus did in 1492, he was in search of the Orient, but he landed in Dominican Republic. And instead of calling them Dominicans, he called the people Indians, thinking he had landed in the Indies. Race as an idea was of a word that we used to use for family or group membership. But with the rise of global capitalism, and that meant, so capitalism, it's the economics of making money, right? And so the Spaniards, when they arrived in Latin America, wanted workers to mine the silver and the gold. Meanwhile, back in Europe, during the Enlightenment, race changed from an idea to categories. We were putting categories to plants and animals, and then we added the humans, and their categories had a hierarchy of good to bad. So when the English colonizers came to the United States, the Americas, before it became the US, they too were looking for riches and gold. But what they found instead of silver was cotton and tobacco. But cotton and tobacco needed workers. And at that time, there were two ways to get workers: enslavement or indentured servants. There's a big difference between these two types of workers. Indentured servants are contract workers. That means they volunteered to work off their free passage from Britain to Virginia. The contract had a fixed terms, meaning it had a beginning and the end. And when the contract ended, these people also got a chance to acquire land and become landowners, and they were treated as humans. In contrast, this enslavement of Black slaves from Africa, they were forced to come here. And they did not have fixed terms, they had a lifetime terms that stayed with them and their children. So slave owners could inherit future slaves through the children of their current slaves. There was no contract, and they were not considered humans and had no rights. So the question is, where do the Asians fit into this new US economy? So Jeffrey, could you launch our first poll for our audience? When did the first Asian immigrants come to the Americas? Was it 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, or 1900s? Right now, we have about 30% of us have put in their answers. We're going to give our friends a couple more seconds. Okay, so Jeffrey, can we share the results?
Yes.
So we have the top answer is 1600s at 41%. And our second answer, 1800s, and then 1700s and 1900s. So in a way, you are correct. Our 1600s, Asians were recruited as workers. So in the 1600s, the Chinese and the Filipinos were already trading in what was considered the Manila-Acapulco trade routes. Then in the 1700s, we have documentation of Filipinos and Asian Indians coming to the US to work. The 1800s brought Chinese and Japanese workers in Hawaii and in the mainland. And our first international student actually came in 1847 as the first Chinese student in Yale in Connecticut. 1900s brought a new wave of immigrants from Korea, the Philippines, and India. And then we had a shift from not coming as workers, but coming as refugees. In the 1960s and 70s, the first wave of Southeast Asian refugees came from Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. So when we had the gold rush in the 1800s, Chinese people came, mainly men, who came to work in the mines. They were recruited by the US mine owners. They were also recruited by railroad workers. 15 to 20,000 workers worked on the railroad, on the Transcontinental Railroad. But when the railroad was finished in 1869, you saw no one in the Golden Spike ceremony. This is the beginning of the historical erasure of Asians, meaning in the US history books, Asian Americans have been contributing to the development of the US, but their contributions have not been told. We have one Chinese American photographer, Corky Lee, who researched the descendants of those 15 and 20,000 workers, their children, and brought them to the same exact spot and redid the pictures showing the Asian Americans. Besides being erased from history, we have actually been instrumental in a lot of historical laws. The first anti-Asian laws occurred in 1854. A white miner killed a Chinese miner, and the only witnesses were other Chinese miners. This happened in California, and he was found guilty, and he appealed it to the California Supreme Court because he cited that you don't let Blacks, mulattoes, Indians testify against a white man. Why are you letting these Chinese or these Mongols testify? And so the white supremacist and racist ideology started back then. And so they overturned his guilty conviction, and he was not convicted and went free. The first anti-Asian immigration law happened in 1875, where it prohibited the entry of Chinese women. Chinese women wanted to come and reunite with their husbands who had come as miners and laborers. And there was a small portion of women who worked as sex workers near the mines. But this law stereotyped and said all Asian women were prostitutes. And so they put into the law that Chinese women were not allowed to come due to their lewd and immoral purposes. This is a stereotype. The Chinese Exclusion Act was in 1882 started the ban, meaning prohibiting Chinese immigrants coming to the United States for 60 years. These are forms of institutional oppression. So there is a xenophobia, a fear or dislike of China or Chinese people, their language or culture. Once you have people who fear them, with fear comes violence. The anti-Asian violence and discrimination has been happening since the 1800s. The largest lynching, meaning the hanging of people from trees, was not done from the African American community, but it was actually Chinese men and boys were lynched in LA by 500 white and Hispanic rioters. The killing of more Chinese occurred in Wyoming. 28 Chinese miners were killed, 15 women, and hundreds were forced out by the town by 150 white vigilantes. The last time we had a huge health crisis, the plague, was the bubonic plague of 1900 to 1904. We had forced containment, meaning we did not allow the Chinatown Chinese residents to leave Chinatown. That led to future internments, just like the Japanese internment camp in 1942 to 45, where 120,000 Japanese Americans were interned. As the US was growing in their economic power, so was their military power. And what they did was they needed access to other countries to sell their goods. And so they used their military power to have wars in other countries. Meanwhile, on the domestic side, we had these stereotypes that was affecting how the white citizens and the people in the US perception of Asians. We were seen as the yellow peril, the perpetual foreigner. You see signs that said Japs keep moving. This is a white man's neighborhood. Or how to tell Japs from the Chinese, because one group was good, one was bad. So there was always this comparison of good minorities versus bad minorities. But the stereotype of the perpetual foreigner still impacts our Asian Americans now. You can hear it when people say, they all look the same. Chinks, slanty eyes. Go back to your country. Where are you from? Why is your English so good? And it's because of you people that Americans don't have jobs. So when you ask where you're from, you assume that you're not born in the United States. So any Asian person is assumed to be a foreigner. Any Asian person is assumed not to speak English very well. And Asians are blamed for the loss of jobs. Just like we recruited them to work for in the mines, and they were used against the white miners. This type of discrimination is called microaggressions. A microaggression is a comment or an action that negatively targets a marginalized group of people. And microaggressions can be intentional or accidental. There are 3 types of microaggressions. Microassaults are intentionally behaving in a discriminatory way. So it's a person telling a racist joke, then saying, I was just joking. Micro-insults are comments and action that is unintentionally discriminatory. Saying, your people must be so proud of you to an Indian doctor. The third type is called micro-invalidations, a comment invalidating, undermining the experience of a group. So it could be heard from a white person telling a Black person that racism does not exist in today's society. In the 1960s, the civil rights movement, along with the Black Power movement, was taking off. They were asking and fighting for structural changes because there was housing, banking, discrimination, and police profiling and brutality. The Asian American community was working in solidarity as allies to the Black and Brown community. But this was a problem for the people in power. So they created a new stereotype to build a wedge between this collaboration. They created the model minority myth, a stereotype that says all Asian Americans are hard workers. They're quiet, submissive, successful whiz kids who are good in math and science, and they're not politically active, not like those Black people, right? This belief that success in Asian Americans is due to some kind of foreign cultural value versus the thinking that the Blacks are lazy and unmotivated. This model minority myth of the 1970s and 80s is still alive now. The Pew Research Center created a study in 2013 where they claimed that America is, Asian Americans are the smartest and the richest group because they use what is called aggregated statistics, meaning they grouped all of the different Asian ethnicities into one. So at the aggregate or group level, all Asians 25 years or older are having a bachelor's degree. So 51%, so 1 in 2 Asians, right? For the Indian group, it's actually 72%. But what you notice is that the disparities within our smaller groups are Vietnamese, Khmer, Hmong, and Lao. The Bhutanese, where only 9% have a bachelor's degree. They only focused on the 6 largest groups of Chinese, Indians, Filipinos, Vietnamese, Koreans, and Japanese. They use census data that says these Asians, all Asians, are getting $73,000 as a median household income, whereas the Filipinos were getting $100,000. They were not paying attention to the smaller groups of $36,000 for the Burmese or $48,000. The Hmong community actually have 30% poverty rate. This model minority myth is trying to say that the Asians are doing well. They are the ones who are the good minorities versus the Black minorities. What it does not allow for people to understand is the complexity and the ways that the Asian American communities are suffering. They don't talk about that the Hmong, Laotian, and Cambodian have a 35 or 40% of their populations who don't even finish high school. They don't talk about the fact that the hepatitis B infection in the United States, 50%, that's the 1 in 2 people who have hepatitis B are Asians. And they don't talk about how the 2.1 million undocumented youth who qualify for the DREAM Act, actually 10% of them are Asians, or that the Asians have had the highest share of long-term unemployment. Right now, 1 in 4 Chinese person in Chinatown are unemployed. This model minority myth is impacting our young children as well. They hear things like, you're good in math and science, right? Or they might hear things from their teachers that said, my Asian students are all nice and quiet. Why aren't you as smart as Kim? And now during COVID, you hear You're the reason we have COVID. Get away from me. Don't cough around me. Or they assume that this is Lowell. Asians aren't a minority here. You're Cambodian, right? And so the fourth oppression is internalized oppression. This is when the young people keep hearing these negative stereotypes and then they think badly about themselves. They might think, I'll show them. I'll be more American than Americans are. I hate Khmer people. I wish I wasn't Khmer. Or, ugh, I wish my parents would stop embarrassing me. Can't they learn to speak English? Eat American food? We're in America now. Or, I wish I looked more like Kelly Jenner. I'm so ugly, because the standards of beauty are around white standards of beauty. Likewise, when they go home to communities who also have a culture of silence. Their parents might be saying, be careful what you say, they'll come after you. Or, you shouldn't speak about our problems to other people. I'm afraid for you. Don't rock the boat. Keep your head down. Or on the opposite, we have nothing to worry about compared to others. It's the other Asians that should be worried, not us. And what is your problem? Our young people will internalize this and say, they never listen to me or take my side. Why can't they understand how hard it is? They sacrifice so much for me. I can't let them down. I should be grateful to even be alive. Or I don't want to embarrass my family or my parents. So they have to internalize the hurt and the pain because their families are afraid for them. I'm now going to show you a video. Please let me know if you can see. Can you see the video?
Trump's situation as COVID.
Start from the beginning.
Walking to work. Older man walking towards my direction yelled effing Chinese disease and suddenly stepped near me and spat at me, hitting my coat, scarf, and face. A lot of disgusting saliva.
I was walking in the park when some kids from my school started spitting on me because they said it was the only way to clean me of COVID-19. They started shoving me, and spit some more, and left.
Some guys from my high school followed me home in their car. They honked very loudly at me and pulled up next to me. And when I looked up, they threw things at me from their car, pretended to cough on me and said, "Ching chong, you have Chinese virus." Then they drove away, rolling up their windows.
Colleague of 4 years, who is a bit of a bully, yells at me, "Hey, this is your fault. It's your people that brought this over," followed by demeaning laughter.
My kids were at the park with their dad, who's white. An older white man pushed my 7-year-old daughter off her bike and yelled at my husband to take your hybrid kids home because they're making everyone sick.
A non-white girl and her grandmother were chanting "Born in the USA" while we were all leaving the store. As they're looking at us, the girl says she is afraid of the Chinese because they have a disease, to which her grandmother says that we should all go back to China. When we parted ways to go to our own cars, the little girl was yelling "Ching Chong Chinaman" all the way to her car.
A white man assaulted me by throwing his drink in my face and shouting things like they should all be banned and they're all disgusting.
I was shouted and harassed by the cashier, workers, as well as the customers at the store to get out of the store. You Chinese bring the virus here and you dare asking people to keep social distance guidelines?
A current graduate student posted, "There's a special place in hell for the effing Chinese and the archaic culture." Trump's description of COVID-19 as the Chinese virus is the most accurate thing he has ever said. I wish he had wiped the whole country off the planet.
Group of people talking. They saw me. I was wearing a mask. One told everyone to shut up, there's one. They all looked at me and moved away. Made sure I didn't follow them.
I'm posting for my dad, a 71-year-old Korean adoptee. Yesterday, he was chased out of a rural convenience store after asking to use her restroom while traveling along I-5 through California.
And so, Jeffrey, can you post the next Zoom? Would you know what to do if you saw someone being attacked? Yeah, no, I don't know. It depends. We have about 69% who have responded. We'll give our friends a couple more seconds. Okay, Jeffrey, can you share the results?
Yes.
So we have about 55% who says yes, 3% says no, 18% I don't know, and 20% says it depends. So we are hoping to increase the yeses. So what does it mean to be an ally? By definition, when you are an ally, you are a person who associates or cooperates with another person, a supporter, right? Because you are uniting and connecting with someone else. We're going to give you 8 Ds, 8 ally strategies. The first 5 comes from Holler Back and the Asian American Advancing Justice. And then I added 3 more that I think that you could do for every day. What we want you to do is to stop, think, and then act. Stop what you're doing and observe what is happening. When someone is being an attack, this is some potential things that you can see. Dilated pupils, meaning their eyes will get bigger, trembling, a rapid heartbeat or breathing, and pale or flushed skin. In their mind, they might have these 3 options going. Should I stay and fight? Should I leave and do a flight response? Or am I going to freeze because I don't know what to do because my brain has shut down? We want you to think about your safety first. Do you feel physically, psychologically, and emotionally safe to act as an ally? If you can say yes, then you can do these 5 strategies of distract, delegate, document, delay, or direct. Distract is just like the word. It means to break the moment and take the attention away from you. If you're outside, you could be like, oh, look, it's a bird, it's a plane. Or if you're in a supermarket, you could ask, where is the, I don't know, the kimchi or the bibimbap? I'm only thinking of H Mart right now, but whatever is Market Basket. What you're doing is just saying things that are distracting people from the victim and the perpetrator. That's a distraction. Delegate means to get help from someone else. And so usually our first instinct for some of our community members is to call 911 or the police. But we want you to check in with the person first because we don't know their prior relationship with the police or if they have a fear of authority. Some of our Asian community members have PTSD like I do, post-traumatic stress disorder. And so it might trigger them and they might not want to be around the police. And so what you could do if you're at Market Basket, go get a store associate, a cashier, a store manager, and see if they could help. Go down the aisle and ask someone else, say, I hear this person being attacked. Can you help them? Before you do the next 3 Ds, check in with the person who's being attacked, okay? Document is just that. You take your phone and you pretend that you're emailing or texting, but you're actually taking a video or a picture. But make sure you feel safe first while documenting, because you can pretend, right? When someone is being attacked, they are being disempowered. That means someone is taking the power away from them. By having a recording, you are re-empowering them and letting them decide whether they want to report the harassment. But by law, we have required reporters. So school staff have to report if they do see an incident. And if you do see an incident at school, we encourage you to use the incident reporting tool here that we will send out for you at the end of the evening. Delay means that sometimes you don't feel safe enough to do something in the moment when you see the attack. You can wait and check in with the person after the incident. If you're at a bus or a subway, can I sit with you? If you're at the market or a bank or any a public institution, can I walk you to your car? A person who is being attacked normally is in shock and they look around to see if anyone else witnessed it. So a knowing glance can reduce that trauma, meaning making eye contact with someone else tells them, I see you, I see your humanity, and I'm here. The direct action is exactly that. It's when you speak up about the disrespectful behavior. This is saying out loud what you're saying. Hey, that's racist, or stop treating him, her, or they that way. It's going and standing by that side. This is not about you being a hero or being right. This is about you protecting the individual. Gosh, I'm feeling it more today. Oh. So, but even if you don't witness an attack, you can still help be an ally. And donate your time to volunteer or donate your money to organizations like StopAAPIHate.org. The Taiwanese grandmother in Auckland, Chinatown, she was punched in the face. Her family member did a GoFundMe and they raised over $1 million. This grandmother turned around and donated the $1 million to Stop AAPI Hate so that other people would not get attacked. You can dine at Asian establishments because we know economically that they're hurting right now. Remember that Asian restaurants, shops, and markets also hire other community members. So by going to their places and giving you their time and money, you're also helping the community. And you can also discuss what you learned today with other people, your family, your friends, and your colleagues, because we need to build a community of allies. We can't do this alone. So now I'm going to ask, do you now know what to do if you saw someone being attacked? Jeffrey, can you launch the last one?
Yeah.
Last poll?
Yes.
Last time we only had 55% of you knowing what to do. And more says it depends. We have about 75% of us able to respond. We have 8 strategies now for you. Okay. Jeffrey, can you share the results? So 94% of those people who responded said yes. And then 6% says, I don't know. And it's okay to not know, right? Because we don't know what the situation is. So in conclusion, we want you to get to know your neighbors, get to know your Asian American community members, because we're trying to build a community. And in order to build a community means we need to build relationships. And relationships it takes time. And so we want you to ask questions. We don't want you to make assumptions about what type of Asians there are. We want you to learn how to pronounce their name correctly. An Asian person's name represents their heritage, their identity, and their family. We also want you to share stories. We don't want you treating us as exotics who you come and learn about us and eat our food, but don't get to know us as humans. And so relationships are a two-way. And so we need to learn just about you just as much as you need to learn about us, because that is how do we build community together. So we invite you to continue learning with us. Come to the next listening sessions in May, where we're going to have Asian American community members sharing their stories with you. And we'll be doing that by schools at the elementary, middle, and high school level. And then also come learn about how do we have these conversations with our children, because that is so important, so that the children understand that we care and we're here for them. We want you to know how to contact Lowell Public Schools for the reporting. So I'm going to try to go to this link to see if it. So this is the incident reporting form that we will be sending out for you all. We're going to be trying to translate this in multiple languages for people. And so where it tells you about discrimination and racism, and then how to report it, and what type of incident it is. And so this is the incidence of reporting is for all types of attack, not just for our Asian American communities. And so we have Latifa Phillips, who is available and willing to also help you if you have any questions. And if you need any of the slides or the materials translated, we have Vanetkin, who will be able to provide that for you. So now we have some time for questions and comments. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so people can see.
And Jeffrey, could you take a moment to show where to find the form on the website?
Sure. Let me just spotlight myself. Hold on one second. All right, so in order to find it on the website, I'm going to share my screen with you. So this is the form itself, and it lives here on our website. On the homepage of the Lowell Public Schools website, lowell.k12.ma.us, you go under the Our District tab, scroll down to Discrimination, Harassment, and Racism, click, and it will take you to this section of the website where you'll see there's a lot of resources here along the left-hand side. Also an introduction here. See that there's the reporting form at the bottom of the introduction, and it also lives right here on the side tab. Fourth one down, click on it, and it'll bring you to the incident reporting form, which you just saw a minute ago.
Great, thank you so much, Jeffrey. So, and thank you, Dr. Oy, for being here these 3 sessions and your willingness to teach and share your experience and your vulnerability. I know it hasn't been easy, so I do want to express our appreciation to you for being with us and for continuing on the learning journey with us. As you mentioned, we will have listening sessions coming up so that we can hear the lived experiences of our Asian American community members, but also other members who have been impacted by racism and discrimination. And the reporting protocol is part of our district effort to address racism, discrimination, bias, to take active steps. And in order for us to understand what's happening, we do need people to report and share what they're experiencing or what they're seeing. And Dr. Oy, I wanted to go back to a slide where you mentioned a culture of silence and sometimes generational differences. And do you have any advice, recommendations for us on how we can work through the culture of silence and get our students to feel confident to speak up, speak out, as well as their families?
Thank you for that question. Yeah, the first two sessions, I didn't bawl my eyes out like this. And so it hits you in different ways, right? So when you experience these things, our culture of silence is pretty strong, especially if in the refugee community where we have been, when the information about us has been used against us, right? And so it comes from a fear-based, and so that's what we are dealing with, historical trauma, with authorities collecting information and then taking us away and putting us into concentration camps or seminars. And so for some of the younger generation, it's the feeling of trust and comfort. They're going to want to know what you're going to do. So once that this form gets collected, Latifa, can you tell community members what happens to the form? Because that might also assuage some concern. Because does it go somewhere, or does it go to? Do they need to put names on it?
Well, it's there's someone at every school designated to investigate, to work through the matter, but it is important that the person know that the safety of the reporter, the person who was impacted by racism, is a top priority in ensuring their safety first before engaging in the process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think for some, it's like starting where there is already trust in the community. And so for us, like the Lao community, there's trust with our temples and our monks, right? For other communities who are Buddhist, it might be their like St. Margaret's or St. Patrick's, their pasture, their community, or it might be community-based organizations like Sadanar for Burmese and Korean family, CMAA, or the Anchor Dance Troupe, or Flying Orb. That there's generational differences, right? So the younger generation might go to Teen Black or Flying Orb, and then the older generation might go to CMAA or some of these other spaces. And so we might need to have different strategies for different generations. Another thing is the youth organizations like the Girls and Boys Club, right? So if they have good relationships with their youth counselor, that could be another place where we can collect information. And so this might be much more of a city collaboration, so that they, because for some places, the school isn't necessarily where they would go to turn to for information, because they say, well, I don't speak English, the form isn't English, how would I do that? And can they use another community member or a community agency to collect that information? I think that's some consideration. But also, I think the community just needs to understand that there's differences here, because we have accountability where you can hold someone accountable. Because in the past, when oppression has happened and they haven't seen that, so they don't know that it's possible. And so giving them the hope that this is going to be going to a place where they're trying to help you, right? We're going to try to stop this. And one of the first things we need to know is what happened. And I also want to couple that with, we might need to also provide some mental health resources, because if they're experiencing the racial trauma, they might need some mental health support to live through that trauma. So it might have to go hand in hand with some of the reporting that we do.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And we know, the intention is that this isn't just a one shot, right? We know that this is an ongoing process, to strengthen and improve our system and ensure that everyone is treated with dignity, with respect in our schools. So thank you, Dr. Oy. Everyone who's joined us tonight, please do look out for the announcements about the listening sessions. And then the final segment will be around sharing strategies with families on how you can talk about racism at home, how to stop racism, how to stop hate, as well as how to have the confidence to report it if something does happen to you. So thank you again. Feel free to reach out if you have questions, and we especially would love for you to share your experience if you feel comfortable doing so. So please let us know, and we hope to see you at our next sessions.
Thank you, everyone. Cảm ơn. Agun, abragato, and muchas gracias, and good night.
Good night.